I'm Sarah. Today is August 8th, 2019. I'll be interviewing Douglas Dollar, my grandfather, in his home in Stillwater, Oklahoma. So, what motivated you to join the military?
Well, that all started when I was a small boy, probably 7 or 8 years old. We lived near Fort Smith, Arkansas, during the Korean War, and Camp Chaffee was right next to Fort Smith, or still is. And I remember as a little boy, soldiers parading down the main street of Fort Smith. And I began then thinking, it really be something to be a soldier. My sister's future husband went into the Army at that time, and he was stationed at Camp Chaffee, and she would take me with her when we'd go over to see him, and I'd see the soldiers in formations. And then when I started college, the same guy who married my sister took me, helped me, encouraged me to go to Oklahoma State University, where they had ROTC, or Reserve Officer Training Corps. And I enrolled in that, and in 1964, and went through officer training that way.
Wow, okay. So, tell me a little bit about your time in basic training.
Well, for officers, we didn't exactly have basic training when I went through ROTC. I went through several courses, including Officer Basic at Fort Benning. But I did want to go airborne. I thought that was impressive. So first school I went to when I went on active duty in June of 1968 was airborne school at Fort Benning, Georgia. And that was an interesting experience. And I remembered one thing, right away I felt like I learned a lesson about training, because you naturally jumping out of an airplane, especially the first time, is a little scary. Matter of fact, I tell people the first 10 times I ever went up in an airplane, I never landed with it because I jumped out of them. And that's true. So we were at Fort Benning, and the third week of training, the first week is Tower Week, actually Ground Week, where there's a lot of physical training, and you practice a lot of stuff. Then Tower Week, where you start jumping out of towers in riggings like you're in a parachute. But anyway, the third week is Jump Week, and you do 5 jumps to become airborne qualified. And the first time I went up in a plane, we went up in old C-119 boxcars, they were called. Actually Korean War vintage planes. And as we were jumping out, I remember I wasn't scared. I just felt like I was just part of a machine. And I just did all I had been trained to do for 2 weeks and went out the door. And I felt, the guy behind me said if I hadn't gone, he didn't think he would have jumped. But I said, that's the way the Army does it. It just trains you in some of these basic things where you need to keep your senses about you. You do it over and over in a well thought out plan until you do it automatically. And that's one of my most memorable occasions in training, is going out the door of an aircraft.
Wow, that's cool. So, what was your primary job after training?
My primary job? Well, I was what was called an 11 Alpha infantryman. The MOS, Military Occupation Specialty, so that's an infantry officer. And as a lieutenant, my first unit was the 82nd Airborne. I'm wearing the hat from the 82nd with its patch. Every veteran, you see, if he's proud of his service, he'll be wearing a hat. So that's what I'm doing. But you're a platoon leader, or I was, in the 1st of the 325th Airborne Infantry Battalion. And I was when we did training, I was leading these soldiers in what infantrymen do in the field. They did need me to be a jump master. I later trained to be a jump master, so I would give orders and directions as we were making jumps out of the planes, and for the troops to jump out and be responsible for that particular plane. So those were some of the duties I had.
Where did you serve the majority of time in service?
What did I?
Where did you serve the
Where did I serve?
Yeah.
The majority of my time was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina on active duty. That's home of the 82nd Division and home of the Airborne. I really enjoyed that. North Carolina is a beautiful state. I had not been away from home very much, so that was quite an experience for me. The other would be Fort Benning, Georgia, where the infantry school is, and then Vietnam. But I left active duty, and most of my time, I ultimately entered the Army Reserve, and most of my time was here in the States. Oklahoma, Virginia, and other places like that, other than being deployed places.
Okay. What rank are you most proud to have earned and why?
Well, maybe 2 ranks. After I left active duty, I had been promoted to captain, and I was actually a captain for 10 years. And I remember when I was promoted by the general, he, with a smile on his face, thought he thought I'd always be a captain. So I guess making major might have been. But I retired as a major general, and I've been very blessed for that. It's been great for retirement. 37 years in the Army, great experiences and great people. So maybe major general, but it doesn't matter. I would have enjoyed it, whatever.
Wow. Which medals or citations are you most honored to have received?
Well, the medals, clearly, for me, was the Combat Infantryman's Badge. And that is something they instigated in World War II when they decided the poor grunt, or ground pounder, or infantryman, as we're called, had about the hardest job, most demanding, most dangerous, perhaps. Others would argue with that, I suppose. But, and that's awarded if you are holding infantry MOS, like I did, and you're in combat. That is, you are in combat and you're under enemy fire. And as soon as that happens, you receive the badge. And that's the most proud I am of. And then the jump wings, I'd have to say. Special Forces tab. I did get an SF later. That darn Ranger tab, which they nearly killed me in Ranger school, but I guess that's neat. So other than the awards for medals you get for different things, those would be the decorations I'm most proud of.
Wow, those sound really cool. Tell me about some of the special people you met.
Special people. There are a lot. I made so many neat people. I met so many neat people in the military of all ages. I'm proud to know and have known. One interesting one was a colonel named Joe Clemens, who was my brigade commander in Vietnam. And Joe Clemens is famous for a Korean War when he was a young lieutenant. He took over command of a company, and they were involved in the Battle of Pork Chop Hill. Not many people will know about that, but it was a very bloody battle during the Korean War, defending a hill. And they made a movie of it in about 1956, I think. And Gregory Peck played Joe Clemens. I like to kid people and say, a lot of people won't know who Gregory Peck was, but he was a famous actor. I like to say Gregory Peck was my brigade commander in Vietnam, but jokingly, of course. But Joe Clemens, anyway, I got to meet him several times and talk to him about his experiences as an officer. He retired as a colonel. He was a colonel when I knew him. And he's a great man, a great leader. I would mention one other. My company commander in Vietnam was a great leader. I was so fortunate to have him as a company commander. And there were so many others, NCOs, who took time to try to teach me, and great soldiers I got to lead. So, but I might mention those two.
What was the best and worst military food you were served?
Food. Oh yeah, food. Well, the best, and every veteran out there that's had C rations, I think will get a kick out of this, was peaches and pound cake. And peaches, well, these sweet peaches would come in one can and the pound cake something else. So if you got one or the other, you'd try to negotiate to somehow get, if you had peaches, you'd try to get the pound cake, and vice versa, so you could mix them up, eat them together. The worst, again, C rations are easy to joke about. They no longer use C rations, it's MREs, but I think ham and lima beans, a lot of veterans will laugh at that too, and we call them something ugly that I can't say on a video, but they were, I thought, terrible. So that's the best and the worst for me.
Yeah, that does sound pretty bad. Tell me a funny story you experienced that could only happen in the military.
Well, there are a bunch, lots of things, and any veteran will have lots of funny stories. The one I often tell about me being a fool of myself, which I did a lot in the military. In Vietnam, our company, they had located somehow up in the mountains west of us, an NVA, that's North Vietnamese Army Base Camp. They sent our company up to, they helicoptered us, heli-lifted us into the lower part of the mountains before we started going up into the hills. And it took a couple of days moving till we got in the area of the base camp. And these trails, and the further we went up, the more dense the jungle became, higher canopy. Every now and then we would run into a few NVA coming down the trail, and there would be some shots exchanged, and I was very surprised, a whole rifle company going up in the mountains, and they weren't that aware that we were there. I found that interesting. That's probably explains why it was hard for us to find them. But anyway, we finally got up in an area, and there was a small helicopter flying overhead trying to tell the company commander where we were. Anyway, I saw what it was, got my platoon online, and we went in the Ville, started throwing percussion grenades in there were tunnels all over the place. The key here is the enemy left right away. We even found food where they had been eating before we got into the camp. But there were these huge spiders, huge things, gray with black spotches running around all through these tunnels. I wondered how in the world they lived in that, the NVA. So anyway, that was a scene. That night, we stayed in this base camp, and up in the jungles, up in the mountains of high hills, it was pitch black. You couldn't see your hand right there in front of your face, and so I was platoon leader, but I took turn standing watch, and I was sitting there in the blackness, hearing the sounds of the jungle, hearing once in a while a guy kind of shuffle around or snore. Pitch dark, wondering if the NVA were going to come and get us, and I felt something here. And I thought, that's strange. And I had my flashlight, and as people know, you can have a red lens to put in that if you need to turn it on at night so it's not as visible. So I held up the light and turned it on, this red light, and here was one of these huge spiders right here, right at my neck. And I screamed and knocked it off and shut the light off. And all of us, it just woke several guys up, and one guy came, what is it, what is it? Are we being attacked? I said, oh, you must have imagined. You know, I was embarrassed. I didn't want them to know I was scared of a spider. I said, oh no, you must have had a dream. There was just, you go back to sleep, there's nothing wrong. So, a silly story, but I guess that helped relieve the tension for me anyway. I didn't ever tell those guys about the spider. I hope they're not listening, the guys that were with me, this story. I'll never live it down.
That's pretty funny. Were you deployed overseas, and if so, for what?
Well, to Vietnam for a year. right after I left on July 4, 1969. I never forget, as I was flying out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, as I was flying out, I was looking down saying, people are celebrating the 4th down there, and here I am going to Vietnam. So that we had other missions, I went other places, but to actually be deployed the longest was Vietnam.
Okay. What was your most demanding part about your deployment?
Well, the most demanding of that deployment, of course, was the fear and the danger. When I got there after a week of training, acclimatization to the heat in Vietnam, I was called in and I was being sent to replace a wounded lieutenant in Charlie Company, 1st 52nd Infantry, and the company had stumbled into a single mine, a 105 millimeter round rig in a tree in the center of an abandoned company position. And they were late and they went in there in the evening. 26 soldiers were wounded, 1 mine, and 4 were killed, including the company commander and also a very courageous medic who attended to the wounded till he died of his own wounds. That was my introduction to the field, knowing that that kind of danger lived out there. And the booby traps, the danger of running into another unit, those in constant demand to feel as a leader, I would be responsible for mistakes I might make that would get men hurt or killed. So that was the most demanding part.
How does your military experience affect your life today?
Well, it's been a wonderful experience for me. I'm a blessed person. I'm very fortunate. I was not wounded. I got to spend 37 years in the Army. I've known many tremendous soldiers. They're still friends. Now every July I go to this Charlie Company reunion in St. Louis, and I didn't realize how great it would be to see these guys and what we went together as young men is a common bond. So I wouldn't trade it for anything. For me, I've been fortunate. For a lot of veterans, it's not that way, I understand, but for me, and a lot that I know, I think I'm very proud to have served as an infantryman, especially, and to have known the people I have and had the great friends I've had.
Thank you. Thank you for your service.
Okay, thank you. Okay, here we're going. We're taking our selfie after the video. I'm taking Sarah out for peaches and pound cake when it's over, right?
Yep.
Okay, hope you enjoyed the video.